I think it's fair to say that my hopes for HBO's The Last of Us to resemble something of relatively high quality weren't particularly high, but to my surprise it was actually honest to God really good. Given my thoughts on how Neil Druckmann has dealt with this IP, with The Last of Us Part 2 being a big pile of steaming garbage, I wasn't expecting the amount of quality writing we actually got. I have to say that Neil and Craig Mazin have managed to make what is quite honestly the best video game adaptation. While something like Arcane is clearly a lot stronger in writing and storytelling, I can't deny that The Last of Us adapted its original story to a decent point of giving credit when it's due. Now that the season has ended, I'd like to talk about it and discuss what I really liked about the show and what I thought really could have been improved on, because it's not without its flaws. But there are sure a lot of highlights to this very consistently good season of TV. So I think it makes sense to start off with the performance of the show, starting with Pedro Pascal as Joel. To say he was amazing throughout the season would be underselling it. While it took me a while to get used to his performance as Joel, his performance was superb from start to finish. From the moment of Joel losing his daughter in a heartbreakingly tragic scene to what we see moments later in a 2-decade time jump, you can see how much the last 2 decades have broken him, being very cold and distant in his initial interaction with Ellie. But as we see over the course of the season, his relationship with Ellie saves him from that distant nature, and how Joel opens up a lot more with them bonding. But with that, his fears of failing again start to grow after the loss of both Henry and Sam. Due to that connection he begins to have with Ellie, he feels he simply can't face that again, and Pedro says it so well. His added sense of failure for not being able to protect Ellie from the world with her childhood innocence, with Ellie having to kill a kid due to his failure to pay attention to what's around him, to not being able to move as Sam is trying to kill Ellie, and his panic attacks throughout episode 6 and seeing Sarah and Ellie a lot. It is a beautiful performance from a man who is extremely vulnerable. This is all laid out in a quite wonderful scene between Joel and Tommy, displaying his fears by breaking down in front of his brother.
You know, she saved my life there from another kid, but she had to shoot him to save me, 14 years old. I saw a man kill his own brother to save her while I just watched. And all I did was stand there. I couldn't move. I was so afraid. Lately, there are these moments where the fear comes up out of nowhere, and my heart, it feels like it stopped. And I have dreams. I just know that when I wake up, I've lost something. I'm failing in my sleep. It's all I've ever done. It's failure. Again.
I had a lot of vocal fears about the casting, and I was so happy to realise how wrong I was. He did such a good job, and I absolutely loved his performance. The writing for Joel himself was brilliant, much like it was in the game. Seeing how far he will go to protect the ones he loves, no matter who is in his way, is a treat to witness. I think the game does a better job with it due to having those moments between the two after encountering infected and raiders, more often due to the gameplay reasons. But there is no doubt to me that this version of Joel was consistently done very well. No issues there for me. You can see the clear chemistry he has with Bella Ramsey, especially by the end of the season. In the finale, we see how much these two have grown together. Joel is way more open with Ellie and has a deep care for her. It's really wonderful stuff. Bella Ramsey was, to me, a big surprise about this show. She was really impressive in what was her breakout role in acting. In the early parts of the season, it didn't feel quite right with her dialogue and acting, but once we get to episode 4 onwards, she really begins to grow on you, not only as an actor, but as a character. Her scenes with Pedro show off the great connection the two have as people, and it's really no surprise that the two in real life have grown to be close friends.
People are making apocalypse jokes like there's no tomorrow. Too soon?
No, it's topical.
Episode 8 was a big highlight with her interaction with David and her final scene. Showing her unleashing violence in such a traumatic setting was brilliant to watch, and great credit should be given to Bella for what she managed to achieve.
It's me. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay, baby girl. I got you. I got you.
Her connection with Joel is what makes the story work as well as it does, so these two working together so well was an absolute must for this show to succeed, and they absolutely aced it. I found Tess as a character in the show a lot weaker compared to the game version. Her death is executed very strangely with the kiss of death. While I get completely that it is a lot more disturbing with how everything comes about, it is a less heroic sacrifice than it was in the game. She just seems a lot lesser overall in the show. Missing out on the Robert scene from the game is also a big loss for me.
Oh, hello, Robert.
Tess, Joel. No hard feelings, right?
None at all.
All right. God damn it! It's complicated. All right. Look, all right, just hear me out on this. I got to... Stop! Oh.
Quit your squirming. You were saying?
I sold him. I just need more time. Just give me a week.
You know, I might have done that if you hadn't tried to fucking kill me.
Come on, it won't
Who
like
has
that.
our guns?
I can't. Just give me a couple days. We can just go in there, finish them off. We get the guns. What do you say? Come on. Yeah, fuck those fireflies. Let's go get them.
That is a stupid idea.
Because this is quite a big loss that paints both Tess and Joel as shitty people who don't have much sympathy towards others. While Joe does get this treatment in future episodes, Tess not having no scenes makes her speech at the end of her tenure not hit as hard as it could have. Anna Torv did a decent job, no doubt about that, but the character didn't leave me with much of an impression compared to the game. The show brings a lot of the same performers from the original game. You have Jeffrey Pierce, who played Tommy in the original game. He gets what is probably the most brutal death of the show, with the bloater ripping his head off clean, which was a great reference to the original game. That is something I absolutely loved. Troy Baker plays James in episode 8 in a nice little cool appearance, and I really like what they did, playing this clearly depressed man in David's group as he hates everything around him and what his life has come to in a wonderful performance. You can see with the little interactions he has with David, all this character and history between the two over these last couple years probably.
I don't mean to question your sense of mercy, David. We can let her go. We bring that girl back with us. She's just another mouth to feed. If we leave her out here, she'll die. Yeah, maybe that's God's will.
Ashley Johnson returns and plays as Anna in the final episode, and she gives in 5 minutes one of the best performances in the entire season for me. Her desperation to survive against the infected and her conversation with Marlene were brilliant scenes that I really appreciated. It was a great opener to the final episode. Along with the meta of her giving birth to Ellie as she once did as the game's version portrayal, it was just a nice little moment. It's something that I really enjoyed. Marlene Dandridge also returns as Marlene, the only actor to actually return as their original character from the game. She does a fantastic job as someone who is desperate to try to get the Fireflies back on track, and with the cure in her hands, will do anything in her power to get that. It's a really, really good performance. The interaction that she has with Joel in the final episode is something I really, really enjoy, and I think they did a fantastic job together.
He thinks it could be a cure, Joel. A cure.
Cordyceps grows inside the brain.
It does. I was there when she was born, Joel. I promised her mother that I would save her child. I promised. So I do understand. I'm the only one who understands. I'm sorry. I have no other choice.
I do.
Moving on from most of the performances from the show, I want to quickly talk about the production overall. The production in the show was top notch, with some excellent locations and set design, with some great direction and cinematography. It was all so well done. It feels real and grounded in this post-apocalyptic world. CGI nowadays is just in a really bad state with modern stuff, but The Last of Us uses it sparingly throughout the show. Episode 8 has great uses of its location, and Episode 6 does the same to make it seem like a really real, working town with people. It's something I really appreciate about the production. It all feels so real and grounded, like I said. I never felt taken out of this world. I felt connected to what was surrounding the story and characters. While there are some costumes that can feel a bit plasticky with the infected, taking a lot of the costume and designs from the game and putting them into the show, I think was executed pretty well. So let's talk about the episodes I liked more in depth, starting with episode 3. While it is a massive change from the game, it managed to tell a beautiful story about simple love between two people, living out a life together in this awful world, and with how Bill realizes how wrong he was about life. Compared to the game's version of Bill being this lonely, troubled individual who isolates himself from the rest of the world, this new version shares a different thematic link to what Joel's journey was all about, protecting those people who mean the most to you no matter who stands in the way. So while this is a change and a major one at that, it still plays a massive part in relating what this whole show is truly about, and it's done so beautifully well. The relationship between Frank and Bill itself was so nicely told. It's a very believable partnership of how they each love each other and argue over how the place looks and how they want to live their life. And we get to their final scene together having dinner for the last time, and Bill making that choice to die alongside Frank, truly believing that he was his only purpose and now his life has been fulfilled. While in a way, it is quite sad, it is something with this side of understanding and beauty in their connection together, and the two do a fantastic job at showing us all that brought through in their performances.
I'm old. I'm satisfied. And you were my purpose.
This episode has a lot to say about what the show means at its core, and it is a welcome change from the original. Moving on to what I would say is the most transitional episode of the season, in a way that really works though. Episode 4 was the episode for me that had to do a lot of work with Ellie and Joel, as this was their first episode to have them together for a full episode on their own. And it begins with Joel's cold demeanour slowly fading away throughout the episode. Ellie using the pun book throughout the episode after the episode's big events was a really great way of showcasing how Joe begins to open up a lot more to her.
What did the mermaid wear to her math class? An algebra. Like, algebra. Why did the Scarecrow get an award?
Because he was outstanding in his field.
You dick. Did you read this?
No. Now go to sleep.
Did you know diarrhea is hereditary? Yeah. It runs in your genes.
That is so goddamn stupid.
You laughed, motherfucker.
Jesus, I'm losing it.
You're losing it big time.
Go to sleep.
The fight they have as they enter Kansas City leads to Joel having to be saved by Ellie by shooting a young kid due to him not being alert enough. The subtle expressions the two give each other during that scene is beautifully done, which is then talked about in their next scene with Joel apologising for not being quick enough. It's a really, really well done scene. It's something different from the game that I actually kind of prefer. We have a few scenes with a group of rebels who've just taken over the city from Fedra. I think Kathleen as a character shows you what The Last of Us 2 could have been, showing someone with his drive for vengeance to the absolute extreme due to something awful happening to someone they deeply cared about. Which comes to the tipping point in the next episode. Which, speaking of, let's talk about my favourite episode of the entire season. This episode, without a doubt, is the best episode for characters. Henry and Sam's relationship is such a unique take on what the original story did, but the changes they made not only show off just how important Sam is to Henry, but to have him commit an act that could have him viewed as the bad guy for protecting someone he loves. Which is a great connection between him and Joel, but also with Kathleen's character, who is sort of alike to Abby. The scene with Kathleen making these choices that she knows on her own brother would not want her to make is such a simple but effective scene for us to understand who she is. Someone who was protected for so long, but deep inside is not a good person at heart, and is fueled by her vengeance to kill Henry, which leads to her death. With Sam's character being deaf, having Henry being that voice for him to understand what's going on in the world, but it being from Henry's words and view, is quite a small part of their interactions that I really love they did. Their bond is strong and their actors did a fantastic job at selling it. Whether the writers decided to hire this actor because he was deaf and decided to make Sam that character, or other way around, either way, I'm thoroughly impressed by what they did. For me though, the peak of the episode is the final scene. It is just brilliant acting from everybody involved.
You okay? Easy, easy, easy. Henry, come on. What did I do? What did I do? Henry, give me the gun. Give me the gun. Henry, no!
Moving on to probably my other favourite episode of the season, episode 8. This episode does a fantastic job with David. Scott Sherman managed to give this uneasy feeling whenever he talks with Ellie. The look in his eyes that something isn't quite right with him is just wonderful acting throughout.
Turns out he was murdered by this crazy man. And get this, that crazy man was traveling with a little girl. You see? Everything happens for a reason.
His need to be this leader is honestly a nice addition to the character compared to the game. We get more of a view of the group than we did in the game. These people clearly fear David a lot, and his want for that equal due to how he sees Ellie is quite disturbing, but very well told. I really didn't appreciate his performance on my first watch, but man, he was excellent. Well done to him for such a good portrayal. I'm very glad what they did with Joel too. His scenes with the two guys is a great watch and being adapted so well, showing us that Joel was still very much a hardened and brutal person when you mess with him or anybody he cares about, and what lengths he will go to protect them. With that, now I'll talk about the other episodes in the season that I found quite weaker in comparison, starting with the first two episodes. While there are a lot of good initial character setups throughout, the pacing of them can be quite tedious at times. This doesn't turn them into bad episodes whatsoever, there's still a lot of good character work. Compared to the rest of the season, episode 1 has a pretty extended runtime, and honestly you can cut out like 20 minutes of this opening if needed, and you can use that time for the other episodes that actually need it more, especially when the original game did this in a much tighter fashion and still got all we needed with Joel's character and his relationship with Sarah. And while it's not like destructive at all, I feel like Sarah going to school and noticing there being a lot of strange things happening in her day isn't really something I need 10 minutes of with the runtime, when we can honestly just have what we already had in the game and keep things a lot tighter in pacing and structure. The episode made quite a lot of changes that I felt made it a lesser version of the game's opener. The car crash being changed to a plane crash just seems way over the top to me, and how they managed to separate Tommy from Joel and Sarah just seems a lot stranger. Just go around the fucking car! Then you're gonna have the scene of him actually making that choice to stay behind and saving Joel and Sarah. You didn't need to do that. Tommy in the game actually makes that choice to stay behind due to Joel is carrying an injured Sarah, and that just makes the scene where they're actually at gunpoint with the soldier just seem a little bit more smoother. And while the game's version of that wasn't fantastic in terms of how it's structured and maybe Joel could have been shot a lot more, it was at least staged better. But there's no design, the acting in that scene is fantastic. Pedro Pascal does a fantastic job with the death of Sarah.
Okay. You're okay. You're okay. Move your hand, baby. Baby, I know it hurts. Baby, listen to me. I gotta get you up. No, I know. Tommy, help me! Joe, come on, baby girl. I gotta get you up.
The next episode didn't have this much issues with its pacing. Joel and Ellie slowly start their development together, and there's some pretty decent interactions here. I like the clicker scene quite a bit, but I felt the characters not doing enough to avoid being alerted by them is kind of a missed opportunity. Not only for having perhaps a reference to the brick and mortars from the games, but it would also be this kind of cool situation to see how competent Joel is when he's fully focused in his situations. And obviously, as I mentioned before, I was not a fan of the last scene of the episode. It was just quite strange to me. Moving on all the way to episode 7, I feel like episode 7 itself could have been cut down quite a bit. I don't see the runtime really justifying itself and having this much of the Left Behind story be bulked by this episode. Left Behind being a fully fledged episode does really feel like we're just pandering around this episode. A lot of stuff in the mall could have been cut down before we start to get the conflict between Ellie and Riley, just so we can probably tighten up the length and have the ending of the episode ease into episode 8 a lot better. I still think the character writing for the two is still pretty strong, but the pacing tends to drag a bit in the middle. Plus the scene of them getting rushed by the infected is pretty weak. Riley just stops shooting at the infected for no reason. She shoots like 4 times, but then just stops, which then leads them to being built, which is kind of stupid. Finally, I'd like to tackle episode 9 on its own to round off this discussion. Firstly, I think the episode is a bit too short for the amount of story we had. The second half feels slightly rushed with Joel's brutal annihilation for the Fireflies. It being a montage of the fight feels like a massive missed chance to show us the desperation of Joel having to quickly save Ellie. I would have loved like a 5-minute sequence of this fight as we progress, seeing Joel become more emotional and more fatigued, selling that time limit that he has. And there's no doubt to me that Pedro could pull that off, there's no doubt. Once the montage ends though, everything that happens is brilliantly executed, from his slow walk to the surgery room, and with him with no hesitation popping off the doctor as soon as he becomes a threat. Now, for the things that I utterly enjoyed in this episode, everything between Joel and Ellie beforehand is wonderful. The draft scene is wonderful, the moment of a father and daughter with the conversation afterwards, that surely this cannot all be for nothing. This is then followed up by one of my favourite scenes in the whole season. Joel's story of his attempted suicide after Sarah's death, and how Ellie saves him from that version of himself. It is honestly a fantastic scene. And of course the final scene of the season is ripped right out from the game and was executed wonderfully, leaving nothing changed with Joel's actions of lying to Ellie in order what he feels is protecting her from what really happened in the hospital. And both Pedro's and Bella's selling of that scene was brilliant to watch.
You find something new to fight for. And maybe that's not what you
Swear
want.
to me. Swear to me that everything you said about the Fireflies is true.
I swear.
Okay.
I guess to really conclude some little points that I have, the show does, as I said, suffer from a lot of pacing issues due to its limited episodes. It can feel at times we don't have much time to breathe with Joel and Ellie in between the massive story beats. When you compare this to the game, the pacing takes its time and allows the story to breathe a lot more, and obviously that's due to being able to play as Joel and actually interact with the world. But if the show was extended probably to like 13 episodes to allow us to see them travel along in this journey, we could have had a lot more scenes with infected or raiders and really let us see Joel and Ellie survive in these stressful situations, which would work well with them working together more and making their bond that much stronger. The other thing that I felt was really lacking was a lack of infected. In some ways, I do understand it being an adaptation from an action-adventure video game where you're dealing with enemies pretty much every 10 minutes or so. It can be hard to translate that into a 9-episode long season. But even then, just having about 4 major encounters that include the infected in dangerous situations, it does make them feel quite vacant from the world when the whole point of the show is trying to find a cure. But those are like small problems I have with the show. Saying that all, I never believe that the show goes below a very low standard of quality. All the episodes absolutely have their strengths and never display glaring holes to make the story fall into a weak territory. Do I think this was the best it could have been? Probably not, but I think it's still quite good for what we got. I'm just happy we have a decent adaptation of The Last of Us. And with video games signaling on what we can consider an upward trajectory, it can only mean good things going forward. Though in saying that, with seasons 2 and 3 on the way, I can't help but feel quite pessimistic for what we have in store.
You don't get to rush this.